Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling one of those really big questions, maybe the most fundamental. What does it truly mean to know something?
Mm,
You might think it's simple, right?
yeah.
Like, I know the sky is blue. Pretty straightforward. But what if that common sense idea, our intuition about knowing, actually has a kind of a hidden flaw? Philosophers, they've been wrestling with this for centuries, defining knowledge. And it's not just navel-gazing. These are big questions. They impact everything from, well, scientific discovery to
Well,
the
that's-
evidence we trust, even just the everyday choices we make. It's fundamental stuff.
It really is. And for a very long time, the sort of standard answer, the definition most people landed on, was this idea of justified true belief, JTB for short. This framework, it basically says that for you to really know something, let's call that something P, any statement, you need three things to be in place. First, P has to actually be true. That's condition, I second two. You have to genuinely believe P. And third, this is key. Three, you need to be justified in believing P. It can't just be a lucky guess. You need good reasons, solid evidence.
Okay, so JTB, truth, belief, justification. Let's take an example. If I say, I know the sky is blue. Well, the sky's a blue, so that's true. I believe it's blue. And I'm justified because, well, I can just look up and see it.
Exactly.
Or I know 2 + 2 = 4. True, I believe it.
Yeah.
And I'm justified by, basic math. It feels neat. It seemed to capture everything.
It does feel neat, and it's not a new idea at all. This basic structure, truth, belief, some kind of good reason, you can trace it way back. Plato, in the Theaetetus, talked about true opinion with an account, which is pretty close.
Wow, okay.
Right?
Plato.
Yeah. And much more recently, you had 20th century philosophers like Chisholm. He talked about needing adequate evidence, and A.J. Ayers used phrasing like having the right to be sure. So the specific words change a bit, but that core idea, true, believed, and somehow well-supported, that's been the standard view for ages, the bedrock definition.
Right. But here's where we dive deep today. What if that definition, the one that seems so solid, so intuitive, just isn't enough? What if you could tick all those boxes, justified, true, belief, and still somehow not actually know the thing? That feels weird. Like, what else could there possibly be?
That's the core question.
So today, we're going to unpack two really fascinating challenges to this whole picture. First, we'll dig into Edmund Gettier's critique of JTB. It was a short paper, but it really shook things up back in '63. Then we'll switch gears a bit and look at Peter Achinstein's argument about inductive reasoning, basically, how we justify believing the future will be like the past and how that might be circular. Get ready for some moments that might just, make you rethink what knowing even means. Okay, so let's really break down JTB first. Before we get to the problems, can you walk us through those three components again? Truth, belief, justification, and why each one was seen as absolutely essential. Like, why couldn't you just have 2 out of 3?
Sure. Yeah, the traditional view was that these three are individually necessary. You need every single one, and jointly sufficient have all three, and boom, you've got knowledge. Or so they thought. Let's start with truth. The proposition P, the thing you claim to know, it has to actually be true, correspondent to reality.
Seems obvious.
It does, right. You just can't know something that's false. If I say, I know pigs fly, but they don't, well, I don't know it, I'm just wrong. Truth is non-negotiable. It anchors knowledge to the way things actually are. Then there's belief. You, the person doing the knowing, have to actually believe P.
Right. It has to be your belief.
Exactly. Knowledge isn't just about facts existing out there. Imagine P is true, and there's great justification for it, maybe in a book somewhere. But if you don't actually believe it, maybe you doubt it, or you've never even considered it, then you don't know it. Knowledge involves a mental state. An acceptance of the proposition as true. If you don't hold the belief, it's not your knowledge.
Okay, makes sense. Truth, belief, and the third one.
Justification. And this is often where things get trickier. Your belief can't just be like a lucky guess or wishful thinking. It needs solid grounding. Think about it. You might believe your lottery ticket will win. And maybe, incredibly, it does. So your belief was true. You definitely believed it. But did you know it would win beforehand?
No way. I just got lucky.
Precisely. You weren't justified. Your belief wasn't based on good reasons or evidence. It was just hope or a random guess. The justification condition is what separates knowledge from accidentally true belief. It demands a rational basis, some kind of evidence or proper reasoning behind your conviction.
So the classic picture is truth plus belief plus justification, knowledge, necessary and sufficient. Seems watertight, but I sense a but coming.
That's exactly right. It seemed watertight for a very, very long time. Clean, logical, intuitive. It felt right. But then philosophy happened. This short paper, just a few pages, landed in 1963, Edmund Gettier. And it basically blew the whole sufficiency part right out of the water.
Okay, here we go. Gettier. He argued JTB is necessary. Sure, you need all three.
Yeah.
But not sufficient? You can have all three and still not have knowledge? How on earth does that work? It feels like breaking logic.
It does feel counterintuitive, but Gettier's genius was how he set it up. He didn't attack truth, belief, or justification directly. Instead, he started with two preliminary points that pretty much everyone agreed on: standard assumptions and epistemology.
Okay, what were they?
Point number one. It's possible to be justified in believing something that is actually false.
Right, like your detective example earlier. Strong evidence points to the wrong person. Justified, but false.
Exactly. Our justification can be really good, really solid based on the evidence we have, but evidence can sometimes be misleading. Justification doesn't guarantee truth. That's point one. Everyone accepts that. Point number two is about logic. It's called deductive justification, basically. If you're justified in believing P, and P logically implies Q, like Q has to be true if P is true.
Like all men are moral implies Socrates is mortal if Socrates is a man.
Precisely. So if you're justified in believing P and P entails Q, and you deduce Q from P and believe Q because of that deduction, then you're also justified in believing Q. Justification transfers through valid logical deduction.
Okay, that seems sound too. Standard logic. So you can be justified in believing a falsehood, and justification flows through logical steps. How does he weaponize these 2 points against JTB?
He uses them to build these clever little stories, these counterexamples. Let's walk through the first one, the famous Smith, Jones, and the coins case. So picture Smith and Jones. They've both applied for the same job. Now, Smith has really strong reasons, strong evidence for believing a combined statement, what we call a conjunction. Let's label it D. Proposition D is, Jones is the man who will get the job, and D. Jones has 10 coins in his pocket.
Okay, a 2-part belief. Why does Smith believe this?
Well, for the first part, Jones will get the job. The company president told Smith directly that Jones was the one they'd chosen. Pretty strong evidence, right?
Yeah, seems pretty conclusive.
And for the second part, Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith himself had literally just counted them a few minutes before. Direct observation.
Okay, so president's word plus his own eyes. Smith seems entirely justified in believing statement.
Right. Based on his evidence, his belief in D is perfectly reasonable, perfectly justified by the usual standards. Now, Smith notices something. Proposition D logically entails another, simpler proposition. If Jones gets the job, A and D has 10 coins, it must follow that. E, the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket.
Makes sense. If D is true, E must be true.
Exactly. So Smith deduces E from his justified belief, D. And because justification transfers through deduction, that was Gettier's second preliminary point, Smith is now justified in believing E too.
Okay, so Smith believes E, and he's justified in believing. We have belief and justification. What about truth, and where's the problem? Is D just false?
Ah, this is the twist. Here's what Smith doesn't know. First, the president was wrong, or maybe changed his mind. Unknown to Smith, Smith himself is actually going to get the job, not Jones.
Oh, okay, so the first part of D is false.
Correct. And second twist, also completely unknown to Smith, Smith himself, by pure coincidence, happens to have exactly 10 coins in his own pocket right now, just a random chance.
Whoa. Okay, Smith gets the job, and he has 10 coins. Jones doesn't get the job. Let me process this.
Now let's look at Proposition E again. The man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Let's check the JTB conditions for Smith's belief in E is true.
Well, Smith gets a job, and Smith has 10 coins. So, yes, Proposition E is actually true.
Correct. Truth condition met. Does Smith believe?
Yes, he deduced it from D and accepted it. Belief condition met.
Is Smith justified in believing E?
Well, yeah. He deduced it logically from D, and he was totally justified in believing D based on the president and counting the coins in Jones's pocket. So justification condition met.
Exactly. All three conditions, true, believed, justified, are met for proposition.
Hang on. Smith doesn't know E is true. His reason for believing it, his entire justification, was based on Jones getting the job and Jones having the coins. That justification is totally disconnected from why E is actually true. It's true because Smith got the job and Smith had the coins, which he didn't even know. It's just a massive coincidence.
You've nailed it. That's the Gettier problem right there. Smith has a justified true belief in E, but we have this incredibly strong intuition that he doesn't know E. His justification points entirely the wrong way. The truth of his belief is accidental relative to his evidence. The justification didn't track the truth properly. It shows that JTB is not sufficient for knowledge. Something else is missing.
Wow. That really clarifies it. The justification has to be linked to the truth in the right way, not just accidentally land on it. Okay, let's look at case 2. Does it make the same point differently?
It does, using a slightly different logical structure disjunction, the either statement, but the core idea is the same. JTB met, knowledge absent due to faulty grounding and coincidence. So this time, imagine Smith has strong evidence for proposition. Jones owns a Ford.
Okay, what's the evidence this time?
Smith's known Jones for ages. Jones has always owned a Ford as far back as Smith can remember. Plus, just now, Jones offered Smith a ride while driving what certainly looked like a Ford.
Okay, seems like pretty solid justification for believing Jones owns a Ford.
A very strong justification for F. Now, Smith has another friend, Brown. Smith has absolutely no clue where Brown is, could be anywhere. Smith then forms 3 either statements disjunctions. He just randomly picks 3 cities. The statements are, G, either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Boston. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Brest-Litovsk.
Okay, why does he form these weird statements?
Logically, if you believe Jones owns a Ford, which is F, then you must also believe either Jones owns a Ford or X for any X, because if the first part of an either is true, the whole thing is true.
Right. If A is true, then A or B must be true no matter what B is.
Exactly. So since Smith is justified in believing F, and F entails GHO, Smith is justified by that same principle of deductive justification in believing all 3 of these disjunctions, even though he has 0 idea where Brown is. His justification comes entirely from his belief about Jones owning a Ford.
Okay, so Smith has justified beliefs in G, H, and I. He's followed the logic perfectly. What's the inevitable twist here? Let me guess. Jones doesn't own a Ford.
You got it. First twist. Unknown to Smith, Jones is driving a rented Ford today. He actually sold his Ford last week. So Smith's core belief, Jones owns a Ford, is actually false.
Okay, so his justification is based on a falsehood.
Correct. Second twist. By sheer, utter coincidence, again, totally unknown to Smith, his friend Brown happens to be in Barcelona right now. Remember, Smith just picked that name out of a hat, basically.
Pure luck again. So let's look at Proposition 8. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona.
Time to check the JTB boxes for Smith's belief in H.
Let's do it. Is H true?
Well, Jones owns a Ford is false, but Brown is in Barcelona is true, by coincidence. And in an either, if one part is true, the whole thing is true. So yes, H is true.
Okay. Truth condition met. Does Smith believe H?
Yes, he deduced it from F and accepted it. Belief condition met.
Is Smith justified in believing? Yes, because he was justified in believing F. And F logically entails H. His reasoning was valid, even though the premise F was false. Justification condition met.
So once again,
We have justified true belief for H. But Smith absolutely does not know that H is true in any meaningful sense. He doesn't know Jones doesn't own a Ford, and he certainly doesn't know Brown is in Barcelona, he just guessed.
Yeah.
His justification is totally based on a falsehood about the Ford. The truth comes from the bit about Brown, which was pure chance.
Exactly. It's the same problem, different structure. JTB is satisfied, but knowledge isn't present because the justification is defective. It relies on a falsehood, and the truth of the belief is secured merely by coincidence, completely disconnected from that justification. These 2 cases, and others like them, were devastating for the JTB definition. They showed it just wasn't enough. Knowledge seems to demand some kind of non-accidental, reliable connection between the justification and the truth.
It really forces you to think about what that connection actually is. Okay, that's a brilliant, if unsettling, look at the JTB problem. Now let's shift focus slightly. You mentioned Peter Achinstein and the problem of induction. How does this challenge our understanding of knowledge or justification?
Right, so Gettier focuses on the definition of knowledge itself, the components. Achinstein, building on a long tradition going back to Hume, looks at a fundamental method we use to gain justification, particularly about the unobserved or the future. Inductive reasoning. Induction is basically generalizing from experience. We observe lots of specific instances, every swan I've seen is white, and we infer a general rule, all swans are white, or make a prediction, the next swan will probably be white.
That sounds like, well, almost all of science and just everyday learning. The sun rises every day, so I expect it tomorrow. Gravity always works, so I expect this pen to fall if I drop it.
Exactly. It's absolutely fundamental. But the philosophical puzzle is, how do we justify this process? How do we know that patterns we've observed in the past will continue into the future? There's no logical guarantee, right? The laws of nature could change tomorrow, theoretically.
Right. It's not a deductive certainty like 2 plus 2 is 4. It's based on experience, but experience is always of the past. How do we bridge that gap to the future?
That's the classic problem of induction. Philosophers have tried various ways to justify it. One approach, attempted by Max Black, was to argue that induction is justified because, well, it's worked so well in the past.
Use its own track record to support it.
Kind of. Black formulated a specific inductive rule, let's call it Rule R, to argue from most instances of as examined under varied conditions have been B to probably the next A will be B.
Okay, like most observed fires under varied conditions have been hot, therefore probably the next fire will be hot. Seems reasonable.
Very reasonable in practice. Black then tried to make an argument for this Rule R, essentially arguing for its reliability. His argument went something like this. Premise A. In most past instances where we used Rule R with true premises, the conclusion turned out to be true, i.e., Rule R was successful. Basically, R has a great track record. Conclusion, therefore, probably the next time we use Rule R with a true premise, it will be successful. So, R will likely continue to work.
Okay, that sounds almost obvious. If something has a history of success, we tend to trust it going forward. What did Achinstein find wrong with that? It feels like how we justify lots of things.
Achinstein pointed out a critical flaw. Black's argument is circular. It commits the fallacy of begging the question.
Circular? How so?
Look at how the argument moves from the premise to the conclusion. The premise is about the past success of Rule R. The conclusion is a prediction about the future success of Rule R. How do you get from R worked in the past to R will probably work in the future? You have to make an inductive leap. You are essentially applying Rule R to itself.
Ah, you're using the very rule you're trying to justify.
Exactly.
To make the inference from its past success to its future success. You're assuming induction works in order to prove induction works.
Precisely. The argument structure is, Rule R has worked in most past cases. Observation. Therefore, Rule R will probably work in the next case. Inductive inference using Rule R. You've presupposed the validity of the very thing you set out to establish.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely circular. It's like saying, my crystal ball is reliable because everything it has predicted has come true, and it just predicted it will continue to be reliable.
That's a perfect analogy. You can't use the method to vouch for the method itself without assuming the method works.
So Achinstein isn't saying induction doesn't work or that we shouldn't use it,
Not at all.
but that this particular justification for it fails because it's logically circular. It doesn't provide independent support.
Exactly right. It highlights this deep philosophical difficulty in finding a non-circular foundation for our reliance on inductive reasoning. If we can't logically justify the very tool we use to learn most things about the world from experience, what does that mean for the status of the knowledge we build with it?
Wow. So between Gettier showing JTB isn't enough and Achinstein highlighting the circularity and justifying induction, it feels like the foundations of knowing are a bit shakier than we might think.
They are certainly more complex and perhaps less certain than our everyday intuitions suggest. These aren't just intellectual games. They force us to confront the limits and nuances of knowledge and justification.
Let's try to connect the dots here. Gettier's cases seem to point towards needing a better link between justification and truth, something beyond just coincidence.
Yes. Gettier shows that even with truth, belief, and what seems like good justification, luck, or coincidence can sneak in and undermine genuine knowing. It pushes us to think about things like the reliability of the process that formed the belief, or ensuring the justification doesn't rely on any false steps, what philosophers call false lemmas. The justification needs to be connected to the truth in the right, non-accidental way.
And Achinstein's point about induction. It challenges the very method we often use to get that justification in the first place, especially for empirical claims about the world.
Right. If our justification relies on induction, and induction itself faces this justification problem, it creates a kind of regress or circularity worry for a huge amount of what we think we know. How can we be sure our methods of justification are sound if the justification for those methods seems to rely on the methods themselves?
It really makes you step back and think, what are the implications for us just trying to learn and be informed? Does it mean we can't really know anything for sure?
Well, it certainly encourages intellectual humility. It suggests knowledge isn't just about having the right answer and a reason. It's about understanding the quality of that reason, its connection to the truth, and maybe even the limits of our ability to justify our most basic reasoning patterns. It pushes us to ask how we know what we claim to know, to examine our sources of justification, and to be aware of potential pitfalls like hidden false assumptions or the role of sheer luck.
So it's less about giving up on knowledge and more about being more rigorous and self-aware in our claims to know.
I think that's a good way to put it. It also shows why philosophy isn't static. These questions are still debated. Epistemologists are constantly working on refining definitions, exploring concepts like reliability, virtue epistemology, contextualism, trying to build accounts of knowledge that can handle Gettier cases and address the problem of induction. And these aren't just abstract debates. Think about scientific evidence, legal standards of proof, evaluating expert testimony. These philosophical insights about justification, evidence, and certainty have real-world relevance.
We've definitely covered some mind-bending ground today, from Gettier's challenge that justified true belief is the whole story, to Achinstein's critique of how we justify induction. It's clear that knowing is a lot slipperier than it looks.
Absolutely. Truth, belief, justification, they seem essential, but the Gettier cases show they're not sufficient. And the very process of justification, especially inductive justification, faces its own deep challenges, like circularity.
So maybe the next time you catch yourself saying, I know that, it's worth a quick pause. Asking, is my belief true? Sure. Do I believe it? Yes. Am I justified? Okay, but how? Is my justification properly connected to the truth? Or could there be a Gettier-style coincidence lurking? And is my justification method itself, maybe induction, resting on shaky ground?
It's a healthy intellectual habit to cultivate. And here's something to really chew on. If knowledge isn't just JTB, and if justifying induction is circular, what more do we need? What could possibly bridge that gap between having a true belief with good reasons and having genuine, rock-solid, undeniable knowledge that's immune to these kinds of philosophical problems? What missing ingredient could defeat both Gettier's coincidences and Hume's challenge to induction?